The elevator ride down to the St. Jude Deep Storage Facility took exactly 42 minutes. It was a pressurized descent into the crust of the earth, beneath the Nevada salt flats. The air grew heavy and metallic, tasting of recycled oxygen and ancient dust. To Arthur Penhaligon, the sensation was less like traveling in a machine and more like being swallowed by a giant, cold-blooded animal. He watched the depth markers flicker. Level 1, Level 2, and after a long, stomach-churning pause, Level 5. He was the new Night Archivist. The pay was obscenely high, the contract ironclad, and the isolation absolute. St. Jude was a private repository for hazardous analog media, films, tapes, and records deemed too dangerous for the surface world. Arthur, a technician of logic, didn't believe in dangerous movies. He believed in the restoration of data. He was here to digitize the ghosts of the past so they could no longer rot. The elevator shuddered to a halt at Level 9. The doors revealed a corridor of polished concrete stretching into a distance that seemed to ignore the curvature of the earth. The air was frigid, kept at 50 degrees to preserve the celluloid. The silence wasn't the quiet of a library. It was a vacuum that sucked the sound of his footsteps right out of the air. He found the control booth, a glass-walled blister where banks of servers hummed with rhythmic green LEDs. On the desk sat a binder labeled Protocol. Arthur opened it, finding rules that felt like a manifesto for the insane. Do not view red stripe materials for over 30 seconds. If the temperature drops, lock yourself in. Ignore any knocking on the glass. And if you see someone in the stacks, it is a trick of the light. Arthur chuckled and grabbed the first canister. Subject 14, the window. He threaded the 16mm reel and hit play. For 20 minutes, the screen showed a single window in an empty room. Then, a face appeared, a shape that looked like a man made of television static. He logged it as abstract surveillance, unaware that the thermometer on the wall had begun to flicker, skipping from 65 to 59 in a single second. Night 3 was different. Arthur was scrubbing through a 1984 police interrogation tape. Every time the suspect said the victim's name, the audio distorted into a high-pitched shriek that made his teeth ache. He took his headphones off and realized the server hum was gone. The air was dead still. He stood to lock the door but stopped. Out in the dim warehouse, a film canister fell from row 14 and rolled toward the booth in absolute, terrifying silence. Arthur cracked the door and stepped out. His voice didn't echo when he called out. He reached the canister and picked it up. It was painfully cold. The label read, Arthur Penhaligon, Arrival. He dropped the tin with a clang that sounded like a gunshot. Back in the booth, he threaded the film. It showed the elevator ride he'd just taken, then cut to a shot of him sleeping in the booth's cot. But Arthur hadn't slept yet. On screen, the version of himself opened his eyes and looked directly into the lens. His jaw unhinged wider than humanly possible as darkness poured out of his mouth like smoke. The phone on the desk rang. He heard a wet, rhythmic slapdrag sound before a dry voice whispered that he had forgotten rule number 3. Arthur slammed the phone down just as a pale, bony finger tapped gently on the glass. He squeezed his eyes shut, unaware that the clock on the wall had stopped moving altogether. By night 5, Arthur was a ghost. He found the logbook of the previous archivist, Dr. Eris Thorne, which spoke of changing geometry and films that bled. Arthur pushed a server rack aside to find a fissure in the concrete. Inside was a living room that mirrored his grandmother's, but with impossible proportions and a rug made of human hair. A faceless mannequin sat there, holding a reel labeled The Truth. He played it. The film showed the surface world being flattened into celluloid, buildings folding like paper. A massive pale hand plucked the earth into a metal canister. The facility wasn't storing movies. It was harvesting reality. Arthur looked at the shelves and realized the silence was actually the muffled screaming of billions of people trapped inside their tins. Determined to stop the noise, Arthur doused a pile of nitrate films with lighter fluid. A glitching version of Dr. Thorne appeared, claiming they were an arc saving the universe from entropy. Arthur threw the lighter. The explosion was staggering. He scrambled into the elevator and hit the button for the surface. The doors opened at level 1, but he wasn't outside. He was in a massive white room with a single projector and a chair. He watched the screen and saw himself in the archive. The film reversed. The fire sucked back into the lighter. Arthur looked at his hands and saw they were flickering and grainy. He was in the canister. The escape was just the plot of the film he had become. A giant blurry face peered down from the sky as the lid of the world clicked shut. 20 years later, a new archivist named Sarah sat in the booth. She found a tin labeled Arthur Penhaligon, The Escape. She played it and saw a man screaming silently behind the glass. He walked to the lens and mouthed her name. Sarah froze as a tin fell from row 14 and rolled toward her. Sarah Jenkins, Arrival. As she stood there, the world didn't just go dark, it was edited out, the scene cutting to black as if someone had simply snipped the film. Stay tuned for more. If you enjoyed this descent into the St. Jude Deep Storage Facility, don't let your own story be lost in the archives. Subscribe now to receive weekly updates, behind-the-scenes lore, and more tales from the edge of reality. Don't miss a single frame.